Low-quality fans of a high-quality Bruins franchise, welcome back, and thank you for joining us for a very special episode where I was desperate to get more understanding about what the locker room really was like this season. I also really wanted to do a full dissection of the year. I wanted to do some front office grades, which we do at the very, very end of this, but the best way I thought to do it was to get somebody who was in the locker room for a lot of the season. And so we are welcoming a guest here today. Gayle Troiani of NESN is going to be joining me to go over all of it, every bit. I think there's some really interesting points that she goes over. I think she has some really great insight to the mindset of the team and kind of how they were reacting through the year to everything that was going on, because she got face-to-face time with a lot of these players and with the front office. I do want to be very, very clear about something here, though. Gayle has done us the pleasure of coming on and chatting with us, but in no way does this reflect anything from New England Sports Network. She is coming as a separate entity. This is not involving NESN at all. That has to be very clear for something like this to work, because they have specific guidelines that they need to follow as they report on the team. I get to not have to do that because I'm just a silly YouTuber online. But so she is coming in to give her own opinions on everything, not NESN's. But I really hope you enjoy it, and then we'll talk after this. Enjoy. Gayle, thank you so much for joining the low-quality team as we try to dissect a season that was less than what we wanted. Let's go with that. That feels appropriate, right? Gayle, could you please introduce yourself to everyone who's watching?
Sure. I am Gayle Troiani from NESN.com. Among the Boston sports that I cover, the Bruins were the top tier team that I covered, that I did majority of my coverage with out at, practices, development camp, games, press conferences, different stuff like that. Not the inside scoop per se, but as close to being an insider as any other, reporter that's out there covering the team.
Yeah, and I was really excited to be able to chat with you finally. We've talked 1,000 times on social media, but not actually gotten to do something like this. And to have somebody who was part of those after the game kind of media moments and kind of saw the vibes in the locker room, because we talked a lot this year about leadership and about how maybe we were holding on to something that didn't exist anymore with like that 2011 championship team and the leaders in the room, the captaincy. And it just gets so discombobulated at a certain point where I feel like we're having takes on each other's takes at a certain point. And yeah, it just turns into a whole mess. So this is the whole purpose of this was we're going to dissect the season. We're going to go from the beginning. We're going to talk about the vibes. We're going to walk through the important moments, and hopefully we have some closure here. I don't think we will, but hopefully we do. And this fan base is, they expect success, and this was not a year that you could say that about. So really the way I want to get this started is the preseason and the lead up to the season, as it were. Obviously, we have things happening like the Swayman holdout, Elias injured,
right.
Just various little stuff like that. But the first thing I actually want to ask you about is there were multiple instances early on, very, very early on, where I felt that Sweeney kept alluding to having a younger presence and having some of the prospects have great opportunities to jump into the league. Do you kind of agree with that? Did you think that was the original plan?
He started that actually after they got eliminated by Florida last year. He started talking about the younger players having an opportunity next year. And then at development camp and rookie camp, the same things were said, not just by Sweeney, but by Mougenel and Adam McQuaid. Whenever someone met with the media press conference after any of those events, it was always, I remember Mougenel saying that Fabian Lysell didn't need to set the world on fire. He just needed to expand his game, basically. I think with Lysell, one thing that prevented him at the beginning of the year was the fact that they wanted him to be a 200-foot player.
Mm-hmm.
They already had Pasternak, who is literally your offensive weapon. They needed someone to complement that 200-foot player, not just the offensive zone player. And they wanted him to learn that it was okay to pass the puck and make the play, to not just be the play.
Mm-hmm.
That was the gist that I got from Mujanel and from McQuaid during rookie camp. And I think he might have been a little bit, I mean, he wasn't at rookie camp. It's like he wasn't there, but that
Right.
was the questions. The questions were there still about him. Like, why, when is he going to make this? When is he going to crack this lineup? And one of the things that I always talk about with fans or other reporters is, who's he pushing out?
Mm-hmm.
Because Brad Marchand said in training camp, before any of those players got sent down, Brad Marchand said, you're fighting for someone else's job. You need to push someone else out to get your spot. And he knew that because he did it.
Right.
He did it in 2011. He did it. He pushed himself out. Now, you look at Marchand when he first came in versus Lysell in their development. Marchand came in on the fourth line.
Yep.
Right? No one expected him to end up on the top line. That wasn't what he was drafted for.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Lysell's different. He was drafted strictly for that offensive, the way he plays. So you don't want him on the fourth line.
Right. Like, you have to push out someone higher in the lineup.
He has to push out someone higher. Who was he pushing out at the beginning of the year?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? They're not going to say, oh, Geeky, we're not going to give you a try, even though last year you had a career year.
Right.
Right? So he's not pushing out Geeky. So they tried Marchand with Geeky. You know what I mean? In Coyle. And they were trying Zacha, Lindholm, and Pasternak.
Yeah.
Who's Lysell pushing out?
Do you think there was no way for him to be considered for... Actually, this brings up an interesting point. So, in my mind, third line role, you could have been more complimentary. Your scoring touch doesn't have to be at its best, but maybe they were scared because they were going to start Poitras at 3C, which they did.
Right.
And then you're sitting there going, oh, he's pushing out Brazeau, or he's pushing out... I mean, Kepke started on the fourth line, but like, Brazeau is a guy who could have been moved down to the fourth, and you'd be happy with that. Do you think that they were so dead set on him playing in the top six that it actually worked against his own benefit there?
I think so, because I think a player like him, you don't learn on the third line.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And he would be playing with Poitras, who's still learning his role.
Right.
And most likely Frederick. Is that really going to excel Lysell's game? No.
Yeah, I think it's a worthwhile debate, honestly, because I was frustrated. I would have liked to see him on that third line, particularly because of the lack of scoring talent on the team. And although Lysell himself is not like a scorer, he's more of a facilitator. And you could make the argument, obviously, that Poitras, same, more of a facilitator than a scorer. But we were also expecting a lot from Trent Frederick this year. We were expecting him to be more of a line-driving presence. And I felt that Lysell could have added to that line, especially with his speed. I am curious now, though, because the way you kind of roll this out is it does sound like they didn't want to have Poitras and Lysell together, the youth being that young on that line and not having him be given top 6 minutes.
I mean, I don't want to say that that's what they said. That was the feeling that I got. You know what I mean? That was the feeling that I got, that they weren't comfortable when he came up for that one game in December and got sent right back down.
Mm-hmm. I
was a little disappointed that he got sent right back down.
Yeah.
But I think that at that point, Monty was already gone and Sacco was in place as the interim. And I think Sacco's message was a little bit more direct than Monty's has ever been on what they wanted to see from Lysell going forward. I think that was part of the difference. And when he finally got called up again after the trade deadline and got those 12 games at the end of the season, you saw a lot of mistakes, just like you did with Lowry this past year. You saw a lot of mistakes. And I know the fans are like, because Neely said it. I remember I was at the black and gold gala when he said it. Are they outplaying their mistakes? And I get where Neely was coming from, but in the same sense, I get where the fans are coming from. Like, how do they learn? But how do you expect a player like Patra, Lysell, Mikulov, how do you expect them? The Bruins aren't the San Jose Sharks, or at least they weren't.
They weren't supposed to be.
They weren't supposed to be, right? They're not the Chicago Blackhawks. You know what I mean? So when you have players like Connor Bedard and Malcolm Celebrini, you know what I mean? Like, they have to be thrown to the wolves.
Yeah.
Because there's no one above them that they're pushing out. You know what I mean? But the Bruins have always had those players that, I mean, we talked about it on one of the, when I was on the What's Bruin podcast with Chris Nozick. Even Pastrnak began his first year in Providence.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Krejci began his first year in Providence.
Oh my gosh, he lit Providence on fire too. Krejci was brilliant in the AHL.
Right. But the only one out of like recent memory, besides, obviously McAvoy and DeBrusk, but like if you go back to like the big Bruins stars, Bergeron was the only one that made the team out of camp. And then he ended up playing a year in Providence just because of the lockout. Yeah, but no one expected Bergeron to be what Bergeron ended up being.
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, no one expected him to be Mr. Selke. When they drafted Bergeron, no one's going, oh my God, this kid is going to be, Sidney Crosby. You know what I mean? Like, Bergeron, his expectation was not what he was. What he became is a pure hockey player that people can embrace. You know what I mean? Yep. And so I think people look at those draft picks and automatically say, well, Bergeron, but how long did it take Bergeron to become Bergeron?
Yeah. And that's, I typically preach patience with any of our prospects for exactly that reason. Do you feel that Marchand's comments early in the season about having to, beat someone out, about having to, pretty good is not going to cut it, I remember a big part of what he was saying. Do you think that really affected the opportunity for Lysell and Merkulov and maybe a couple other young guys? Although I don't think anyone else is really going to make that leap.
I mean, I think that, if Marchand's saying, I want to play with Geeky, Montgomery's not going to say, nope, you got to play with Lysell. He's going to make his captain happy, right?
Yeah.
And I think Marchand, because he had to push someone out. In 2011, when he came up and he's on that fourth line, he worked his way up and ended up playing in the Stanley Cup final with Patrice Bergeron and Mark Recchi. He went from the fourth line to, and they weren't even considered the top line because David
second
Krejci,
line, yeah. People forget David Krejci was a 1C on the championship team.
Right. You know what I mean? Like, people forget that too.
Yeah.
Because of what Marchand and Bergeron did after that.
Yeah.
And I still say that Krejci would have stayed your number one center had he had consistent wings. You know what I mean? But they never
had a wing again after that.
He literally never had consistent wings. The poor guy, I mean,
I've talked to him a few times. Like, he actually golfs down here in South Carolina. I've talked to him a few times at this point, and every time he just doesn't care. He's just the most aloof guy about it. He loved his career.
But how could you not love his career? But you look at what he could have done had he had those consistent wings. You know what I mean? You look at what Bergeron and Marchand did, the two of them together. had Krejci had at least one wing
Yeah.
his entire career, the way Bergeron did, you just can't imagine. I mean, it's disheartening
Yeah.
to us
I mean,
that David Krejci did.
he's a fringe rafters guy. And
Oh,
you think if he had
oh,
real wingers all that time, he's just a rafters guy, period.
yeah, yeah.
We're getting I'm sorry to get excited about all the old talk. So one other thing during the before really we got the season kicked off, obviously is a Swayman holdout.
Yeah.
This has been talked about to death. At the end of the day, being around those guys, seeing the mood of everybody on the team, did anyone actually care, or was everyone super supportive of Swayman and just like, we'll get there when we get there?
If they had any ill will towards him, they never showed it. They
Okay.
never showed it. They never showed it in the locker room. You never felt it in the locker room, not in training camp, not during the regular season. I think because, and again, this is my opinion,
Sure.
not that anyone said this, but I think had Chara and Bergeron still been there, it may have been a little bit different because they, and it's nothing against Marchand, but Marchand, the reason why he was traded because he thought his value was higher. You know what I mean? They couldn't
Oh,
come to
we'll get
terms.
there for sure.
You know what I mean? They couldn't come to terms based on, and Sweeney's comments were he had the right to test the market for, you know what I mean? So I think because we saw Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci take those team-friendly deals before the historic season, that we expect every player to do that.
So
Right?
I love this though, because before the record season, yes, they took very simple deals to be able to play hockey on the Bruins.
Right.
When you say team-friendly deals, there's a lot of people out there that think Bergeron and Krejci's deals and Marchand's deals for their long contracts were team-friendly. That's actually not really true. Maybe they didn't gouge them for everything they had, but at the time, percentage-based cap hit, they were right up there with top-line talents. There wasn't some crazy, like these days we just see the numbers and we think, well, back then Bergeron was making 6.5. It's like, yeah, but that was a huge contract back then.
Right. Because David Pastrnak signed that first big contract with Boston. And then a year after Pastrnak signed that contract, William Nylander got even more. You know what I mean? So Pastrnak, and that's the whole thing that people forget is that, so Pastrnak signs this deal, then William Nylander signs this deal, then you're going to see Nathan McKinnon, you know what I mean? Leon Draisaitl. It rolls uphill.
Yeah.
And people, and so, yes, we saw Bergeron, Krejci, Chara, Marchand. They all signed what at the time was within the cap, but they were still high dollar amounts, but they weren't what David Krejci's getting.
Right.
You know what I mean? So when the contract for Swayman, and that's where a lot of people, they get so mad at Swayman for saying he needed to set the market for the goaltenders.
Yeah.
Well, David Pastrnak, without voicing it, set the market for wingers. You know what I mean? Like without, he didn't come out and say, I need to set the market, but that's basically what he did.
Swayman's too honest for his own good.
Right. I think Swayman is very smart. He is very, very smart. He thinks of his words, not calculated, but he's very clear. And he's also, I'm going to do, like he said, at the end of the day, I'm stopping pucks for the Boston Bruins. He said that before he signed his contract. Yeah, he talked about the business side of it because fans don't care. And fans don't care about the business side of it. Fans look, like if you go back to the historic season, Sweeney did everything possible to get that team another Stanley Cup. He
Yeah.
brought Bergeron back on a very, very economic deal. He brought Krejci back on a very economic deal. At the trade deadline, you didn't see the players leave that impacted the team, but you saw players come in that impacted the team. Orlov, Bertuzzi, who am I missing? Hathaway. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, you saw those players come in that impacted the team. At the end of the day, when they got bounced by Florida in the first round, people had to, like, everyone's like, oh, they got to bring everyone back. How? They
Yeah, there's
had
no possible way.
absolutely no cap space.
Orlov signed a $7 million deal.
Right.
That offseason, he signed $7 million per year with Carolina. It was never happening with
And Bertuzzi signed what, 5 with Toronto or 6 with Toronto?
Something like that. I honestly,
you know what I mean?
Bertuzzi, I was kind of happy to see go. So I was like, all right, bye.
I wouldn't have mind Bertuzzi staying, but not at the expense of any of the players that they still had. The fact that they had to trade Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno to bring in anything shows you what Sweeney had to do with the cap. You know what I mean? The fact that they had to trade Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno for what? They got Parker Wotherspoon back in the trade, and who else? Like, not a lot. I mean, there wasn't a lot in the trade. You know what I mean? And then he signed Morgan Geekie to a very, again, team-friendly deal. Now they're going to have to pay Morgan Geekie. They obviously, and that's the thing, like, people forget. They talk about the scouts in the draft.
Mm-hmm.
Sweeney, yes, he has final say, but he's relying on his scouts to tell him what players. And a lot of people are now talking about, because Wyatt Johnson is doing what he's doing in Dallas.
2 picks
and,
after.
And Lysell was picked before Wyatt Johnson. Okay. But if you look at the prospect reports, Lysell was drafted where he should have been drafted.
Yeah, even lower than he should have been, or farther back than he should have been drafted. And that was a COVID year, which was an impossible ask for anybody anyway. But no, we did the same thing with all these players.
But again, so Dallas weren't the contenders that the Bruins were in those years either. You know what I mean? So it's like you can't. It's not like they had the number 1 pick. It's not like they had the number 1 pick and they picked Morgan Geekie over Connor Bedard. You know what I mean? Like, let's be realistic here.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. So moving on to the signing, Jeremy Swayman. He signs 8 years, $8.25 million annually. What was the vibe? Was it a full group sigh of relief? Was it an immediate concern of how ready he is? Did the whole process kind of irk everyone by the end and they were just glad to get it over with?
In all honesty, I think when you have goalie Bob working with any of their goaltenders, they had Korpisalo ready to take the bulk of the load if he needed to. Okay. And I don't think anyone expected DiPietro to have the season that he's been having in Providence.
Yeah, hell of a year.
Right? But I don't think anyone expected him to have that. I think they expected Swayman to be Swayman. I think it was like, all right, we got our 2 goaltenders. We're going to go out and we're going to play. And like you said in your notes, basically, Hampus Lindholm, him getting hurt as early as he did in the season and Swayman missing camp are 2 big factors for why this Bruins team. And I think by the time Swayman found his groove, which was right before the Christmas break, the holiday break, because he went, 4-0-1?
Yeah, he had a good stretch there right before the New Year.
He had a good stretch right before that break. Then they come back from the break. They kind of take a little bit of a nosedive, and then they have the Four
Mm-hmm.
Nations break. And he didn't get any reps in the Four Nation break. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He played for Four Nations, but he didn't even get one game. He didn't
People
even
kept reaching
get.
out and be like, what if he gets injured? I'm like, he's not going to play. It's
I'm
fine.
like, but you probably would have seen a little bit better had he at least gotten a period. You know what I mean? He got no game time. So yeah, he's in practice, but he's still not getting the reps that, you know what I mean, that he would have gotten if he were playing.
Yeah.
And I don't blame Mike Sullivan for not playing him, but in the same sense, it's like you couldn't play him for a period in Boston. Maybe not in the championship game. You knew they were in the championship game. So that first game, what was it? Would they play Sweden in that first game, or was it Finland? I don't know. Who did they play the first game in Boston? I can't remember.
It was either Sweden or Finland. I want to say it was Finland, but I don't remember. I wasn't that tuned into it, honestly. I was so frustrated.
Well, I was there. I was there for all 3 games in Boston. I was there as a member of the media, so I was up on the 9th floor, and I was really hoping that he was going to play at least half the game of the game that didn't matter because they had already clinched. They already knew they were playing the championship game. They just didn't know who they were playing. You know what I mean? So I was hoping that he was going to at least get half the game because it didn't matter. You know what I mean? But he didn't. So he didn't get any reps. And then they came out of the break, and the only 2 players, I mean, again, they lost McAvoy. So they come out of that break, and the only 2 players that played like they were gonna 100% be were Pasternak and Geeky.
Yeah.
And then coming out of that break too, you started to see Elias Lindholm playing the way you expected him to play all season. Because he
it
also
came a
played in
little
tournament.
later.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, no, you started to see signs of it, but it
Mhm.
wasn't until after the deadline. So
Yeah.
it was like it was a couple of weeks, they came out of Four Nations. It was still before the March 8th deadline. You started to see signs of it, but then after the deadline, when Marchand's gone, Coyle's gone, Frederick's gone, Brazeau's gone,
The front
Brandon
office
Carlo's
waved the
gone.
white flag. They said,
Yeah,
we're done.
it was like all of a sudden Zaka got moved down and Elias Lindholm is playing with Pasternak and Geeky, and it was finally what they wanted with Elias Lindholm and Pasternak. It was what they finally wanted. They finally got that. And he had started Elias Lindholm, I think when he was playing for Four Nations, he didn't have that pressure on him.
Yeah.
And he was obviously feeling better. And you saw the Elias Lindholm that they were expecting. You know what I mean? And so down the stretch, when it didn't matter anymore, they had already waved that white flag. That pressure wasn't there. But you started to see the Elias Lindholm that they signed, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That they expected. And no one knew what injury he had.
Yeah, so actually, this is actually going to bring us back a little bit here
Right.
because we start the year, and after all the talk about needing the young guys in the lineup, they're not there. Patra's injured to start the year, but Lysell, Kantar, Merkulov, all of them starting the year on the outside looking in. And we didn't catch any word. We knew that he had been injured in the preseason, but Lindholm was in the lineup, and they said he was healthy, that he was ready to go. And despite the surgeries for Marchand, he was healthy. He was ready to go. Now, everyone was willing to give Marchand a bunch of grace. Three surgeries in the offseason. We weren't expecting a lot. But Marchand early on looked like one of the only players who was ready to play.
Right.
The beginning of the season was rough.
Because Pasternak got banged up.
Yep.
And even though he played all of camp and all of preseason, he didn't allude to, he admitted, after the season started that he got off to a slow start because he was he got a little banged up playing in Worlds. That's the price that some of these players pay playing in Worlds.
A lot of hockey.
Pasternak's playing in Worlds again. Laco's in Worlds. They just announced that Lindholm's playing in Worlds. Swayman's playing in World. You know what I mean? Like, so, but these players are not. And I know that McAvoy said that Four Nations pretty much ruined his season.
Yeah, cost him a season. Yeah.
But in the same sense, given the, like, I asked Bergeron, it was before the first unobstructed views with Razor, Bergeron, and Rask. I asked Bergeron, hindsight, would you have not played game 6 in 2013 if you had known the outcome? Because he played with a broken collarbone, a punctured lung, the torn cartilage, all that stuff. And he's like, no, you want to be out there. You want to play. He basically said, I wrote about it. He said that hindsight didn't matter. He still wanted to be out there. He wanted to be battling. So, yeah, McAvoy could say that now that Four Nations did that, but he's still not going to turn down, you know what I mean? He wouldn't have turned down the tournament. No, you know what I mean? Because anytime you lace up those skates, you can be injured.
Yeah.
Look at Hampus Lindholm.
Yeah.
Nine
we thought
times
he was
out of
coming
10,
back all year.
9 times out of 10, he's going to block a shot. He's going to put his body in front of the puck. He just happened to get the puck the wrong way that one time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So for any player to say, like a Pasternak, a Marchand, a McAvoy, if they're at 95%, they're going to be in the lineup before anyone else.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
And I didn't get the vibe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, I didn't get the vibe that McAvoy blamed the injury on going to Four Nations.
No.
It more was just like, no, it cost me my season. It felt like
Yeah.
more of a matter of fact than it was
Yeah.
a begrudging thing.
Yeah, no, I don't think that he was like, I shouldn't have played, but a lot of fans are throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Because Brady Tkachuk got injured, Matthew Tkachuk got injured, McAvoy got in. You know what I mean? So many players got injured in these tournaments. But so the fans want the NHL in the Olympics.
But they want to make sure there's no injuries.
Right. I mean, like, all right. So I was at the Fleet game on Saturday. Okay.
Oh, nice.
And their season was ended by Minnesota.
Yeah.
They needed to get at least 1 point, right? Erin Frankel got injured in Worlds. She played the final game of the season. She was cleared to play. She was not 100%. I asked Courtney Kessel. She's like, Erin Frankel tells me she's ready to go. They pulled her because she was the Erin Frankel that it's always one of those things that, but Hillary Knight said they're not going to say that they don't want to play because they want to play.
Oh, yeah.
So
yeah, and there's no athlete who turns down the opportunity. Absolutely.
No, I mean there are a couple of players that will turn down because who is it that's not going to Worlds? Someone from the Senators just said that they're not going, and it's for Team USA, and I forget who it is, but
it's not Tkachuk then, right?
No, it's not Tkachuk. It's who I just read it too not long ago that they said that they're not going, but it could be that they're battling something,
right?
That they want to heal for the rest of the, or maybe they played Four Nations. You know what I mean? They didn't get any time off, so they want to just recharge their batteries. They've had enough hockey. You know what I mean? And it's not that. Maybe had they not made the playoffs, maybe he would be playing. Kind of like, I'm not sure that if Pasternak, if they had gone to the playoffs and got bounced in the first round, I'm not sure Pasternak plays again this year. You know what I mean? Given what he went through last year. So, I mean, you never know with athletes, and it's their right. It's their body. They know what their body. You know what I mean? And I think Swayman saying yes to playing in Worlds this year is because of the fact that he started late.
Yeah, I think he's still trying to get right. I think, honestly, because he didn't finish the season on an impressive note either.
No. But I think you're going to see a very different Jeremy Swayman next year.
I'm confident in that too. I really am.
100% confident that you're going to see the Swayman that took the net from Allmark.
Yeah. God, I hope so.
I think
we really need that.
I think you're gonna see that Swayman. I think you're gonna see that Swayman because in the press conference, and I know we haven't gotten that far yet, but I'm jumping ahead. In the press conference, Sweeney said he wants competition and it starts in net. So I think he's basically saying to Swayman, you got to prove that you're our number one goaltender. You got to take that net back. Because in hindsight, he said in the press conference that they probably could have given more games to Korpisalo, but they kept trying to get that Swayman back. And again, it's one of those things where you just paid your number one goaltender this amount of money. He's telling you he wants the net.
You got to give it to him. Yeah.
You give it to him.
But I like that at this point, and we'll get there, but talking about, well, you had your chance to earn it. You didn't meet the standard. You got to earn it again.
And Korpisalo said, no one's happy playing 20, 25 games. And he's right.
Interesting comments.
Right. And I don't blame him for making those comments because a lot of the times in the regular season, he looked like the better goaltender.
Certainly, but that might have been my faint praise.
He wasn't the goaltender. He wasn't the goaltender giving up 8 goals against the Jets. He wasn't the goaltender giving up 8 goals against Dallas. But again, he wasn't the goaltender that they put in those games.
Right.
We're
also talking with Korpisalo, we're also talking about a sub 900 save percentage, some stinkers in there. He had some really bright spots as well, but it was him being the better goalie was more about how bad Swayman's season had been going.
Right.
It would still be something that you look at and be like, well, you're still backup quality. It's just our starter is not starter quality right now.
But I don't think that with the team in front, and that's the other thing too, is that we always talk about the offense, but the Bruins have always been built from goaltender out.
Yeah, net out.
They've always prided themselves goaltender out. If they have the goaltending, they have the defense, the offense will come, right?
Yeah.
That's the way the Bruins have always been. So they went from, you look back just in the history of goaltending, right? Go back to Andy Moog. And Byron Defoe.
There's a bunch of people who just smile, by the way, hearing that name.
Right. But Andy Moog, Byron Defoe, go back that far. And then you look at Andrew Raycroft's rookie year. He won the Calder. You know what I mean? Him and Samsonov were the last 2 Bruins to win the Calder. He's one of the last goaltenders to win the Calder. He beat out, it's funny too, because Swayman says that it's one thing that he has over Sidney Crosby, I think it is, because Crosby didn't win the Calder. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's funny to hear Raycroft talk about that. But then, and then you had Thomas and Tuukka. Now, if you go back to Thomas and Tuukka, Tim Thomas came out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Because in 2010, it was Tuukka-esque. And had he not been hurt and Krejci not been hurt in 2010, they don't lose to Philadelphia.
No, God, no.
Right?
Yeah.
So, and then 2011, all of a sudden, Timmy came in and stole the net from Tuukka.
Yep.
And then Tuukka took the net back. You know what I mean? It took him a year because it took him
Thomas
a year.
kind of started thinking of other things at a certain point, which is a whole different conversation that we shouldn't get into.
Right. Well, and Thomas really, it's funny because I have a new respect for Thomas. I didn't like Thomas when he played for Boston.
Oh,
I really didn't. Yeah, I'm one of those people that they won the cup in spite of him. That if it wasn't for Chara and Seidenberg, he was so out of position so much in those playoffs that I'm like, dude, what are you doing? And
he's
then
like a Jonathan Quick type, though. He just like springs back and makes the save. It's crazy.
And he does, like he had some of those how the hell did he make that?
Mm-hmm.
But then he would let up the softest goals. And I'd be like, dude, what are you doing? So I had a love-hate relationship with Tim Thomas.
Mm-hmm.
But so then you had a couple of years, Tuca, where he was just running people out of town, basically. No matter who his backup was, it was Tuca. And
Yeah.
Tuca gets so much hate. I will say I had the greatest conversation with Tuca this weekend.
Yeah.
He was at the Fleet game, and I won't say what he said about Hellebuck because it was off the record.
Mm.
But basically, what him and I talked about, I was like, you would be crucified if he was doing what Hellebuck did.
Oh my God! Yes.
He got crucified for smiling the wrong way.
Yeah, he has a
But
creepy
if
smile.
he was,
Though. He genuinely has a creepy smile. He's a creepy. Like when that guy is really just standing still, it's just kind of creepy.
I love Tuca. He is like such a great guy to talk to. I wish I didn't say to him off the record because I have so much I want to share. But I was like, off the record, I got to ask you. And what he said to me, and I have witnesses because Natalie Nuri and Faith from the Fleet were with me when we were talking to Tuca. So I can't betray that trust. But what he said to me was so awesome. But like I said to him, I'm like, you would be crucified. He's like, and I was, you know what I mean?
Yes,
So,
yeah. He
but
really locked in under a lot of criticism and had. Obviously, this is a franchise's greatest goaltender, technically.
right,
So,
yeah.
let's. I'm gonna run through some quick dates here, and I want you to kind of tell me when you really felt something in the air shift in the locker room. So, season starts bad first month. 4-6-1 through the first month, and we have the worst offense in the NHL analytically. We were shut out multiple times, lost by large margins multiple times, and it just kind of kept going where we were just a revolving door on second right wing. The only line that was scoring was the fourth line.
Right.
So we get into November, and Pasta gets benched for a third period. Which was interesting in the first week. Tyler Johnson signs a contract. He's immediately tried on the top line in place of, it was Johnson, Zacha, Pasta, or Johnson, Lindholm, Pasta initially. I think it was Zacha. Up there.
I think Zacha had already been moved up to that top line.
Yeah.
Because I think at that point, Lindholm had already been demoted to the third.
Yeah. And then a week later, Patra's sent down. He's been struggling. Then the next day, Hampus goes down, and we know it's long term. We didn't realize at the time how long. And then we win a few games, go 4 for 6, and then promptly lose the next 3. So Monty is dismissed on November 19th. Was it before that or after that where something shifted in the room of, okay, we might actually be in trouble? Now, I know us as fans, weeks prior, we're in trouble. But in the room.
So you could feel it even though they didn't say it. Swayman again would say all the right things. I believe in this group. We have believability. But your leaders of Marchand, Pastrnak, Coyle was still there at the time. They would say it, we're not playing 60 minutes. We either starting slow and then we find it, but it's too late because we're already playing playing from behind, or they would start off great and then they would suck for the last 40 minutes. They just could not play a full 60 minutes. And I don't know if that was just a Monty thing. Hindsight, Monty had one foot out the door. When he didn't,
wow.
When they didn't,
you agree with that?
When they didn't get that deal done for his extension, you could tell, like, even Sweeney said it, like the players weren't ready coming out of camp.
Yeah.
They weren't ready coming out of camp. That's on the coach. That's not just on the players. Part of it lies on the coach. Part of it lies on the players, but it's also on the coach. You know what I mean? You're not getting your players ready to play. And there was a different demeanor from Monty in the press conferences this year. Last year there was more of a sparkle in his eye, so to say. You know what I mean? I didn't see that this year through the first 19 games or whatever it was that he coached. I didn't see that fire that he had the first 2 seasons that he was in Boston. I don't know if after, because we'll never know, if after the second time Florida eliminated them, if Sweeney or Neely said to Monty, we're bringing you back, but we got you on a short leash. We're going to be, you know what I mean? And I don't know if that's why a deal didn't get done, because Sweeney said they tried to get the deal done. And he's like, it takes 2 sides, and the fact that he was hired so quickly in St. Louis, you know what I mean? Like the fact that he was, let go from Boston, then what's his name in St. Louis, let go of, and then all of a sudden it was a matter of like 3 days. It wasn't even like,
I think, at
it was
most,
like,
right?
It was quicker. It was a quicker turnaround for him to land in St. Louis than Sullivan to land in New York. You know what I mean? I didn't think that Sullivan was going to be on the market for very long.
No, me neither.
But the fact that Monty landed as quickly as he did, but I think that I don't think the players were defeated, but they just didn't have the same desire. It felt like when you looked at the team, they didn't seem to have that same fire in the locker room after games. You know what I mean? Like it was kind of like I saw, and it was like we talked about it at breakup day, me and a bunch of the other reporters. McAvoy, Pasternak, and Marchand were the only 3 available after they fired Monty and named Sacco as interim coach. So that next day, Don Sweeney held his press conference. Joe Sacco held his press conference. When they opened the locker room, it was only the 3 leaders, the 3 letter holders. And they pretty much all said the same exact thing, which means it was rehearsed or it was scripted. It was, this is what you have to say. They all said that we let Monty down. They all said we weren't prepared. They didn't throw Bruce Cassidy under the bus. They didn't throw Claude Julien under the bus. They're certainly not going to throw Montgomery under the bus. You know what I mean? But it was just weird. If you go back and watch the 3 of them, their comments, the 3 of them, they were all the same. So it was like, did they tell them all that this is what they had to say?
Media training for this one in particular. And I think it's interesting too, because just a few weeks before that, McAvoy talked about how, well, you don't win the cup in October. And a lot of the fan base, myself included, went, yeah, but the whole, like, you don't lose your draft or you don't win your draft in the first round, but you can lose your draft in the first round kind of thing. Like, you've got to still get going. Like, there's a track here to success. Interesting. I really wonder. I wonder for a lot of them how much 2022. I mean, just the way that season ended, the injuries down the center, the injuries on the back end, the struggle with coaching decisions in net for that first round series against the Panthers. There was a lot that went wrong all at the perfect time, which hockey, what are you going to do? But I wonder, if you go into the next season, you're successful again. You don't get very deep though. And then how frustrated do you get?
So that second season, everyone counted the Bruins out. All the insiders.
Lost a ton of talent in the offseason. Yeah.
Right. But all the national writers, all the, they count the Bruins are not going to make the playoffs, this, that, the other thing. They didn't win the division, but they were second. Florida, you know what I mean? But if you listen to Marchand, he's like, we knew what we were going to do. But again, you still had Allmark and Swayman. Yes, you lost Bergeron. Yes, you lost Krejci. But other than that, they lost their trade deadline pieces. You know, and yes, they lost Taylor Hall and Nick Foligno. But who they brought in, they didn't lose DeBrusque yet. So they didn't lose their secondary scoring. That's the whole thing. Like, yes, they lost Bergeron and they lost Krejci, which were two huge things. But Charlie Coyle played out of his mind.
What was a almost career year for him. I forget what his numbers ended up being because he had some great years in Minnesota. Right. But as far as a Bruin, career year for a Bruin. Right. Zacha, same thing. Just unbelievable season for him.
Right. And no one expected it. And yes, they're not your true 1C, 2C players, but they played like it enough.
Yeah.
Surrounded by Marchand, surrounded by DeBrusque, surrounded by Pasternak, surrounded by Geekie. And again, no one expected Geekie to do what he did that year.
Nope.
And then this year, Geekie. So going into the offseason this past year, you know, they were like, they brought in players that they thought would benefit them once they got in the playoffs.
Yes. I agree with that. A lot of face-off wins, a lot of physicality.
They didn't bring in players that they thought were going to get them to the playoffs, but what they could do in the playoffs. Yes. Okay. And down the stretch, you saw that Zadorov played much better in Boston. So did Lindholm, right? Yeah. But they didn't get the production out of Geekie at the beginning of the season.
Nope. Yep.
They never got the production out of Coyle, Frederick, Brazeau,
Zacha,
Max Jones, those players that they expected to get the production out of. So they didn't go. So that's why they went for the reason why they call Lindholm Bergeron light is not because of his offensive skills. It was his defensive skills.
Which also wasn't there for a large portion of the beginning of the
season.
But back injury and, you know.
But that was why they brought him in. They didn't bring him in to be an offensive production. They brought him in to be the 200-foot center, to help facilitate the puck, to be your offensive zone and defensive zone faceoff taker, you know, to fill that bumper role on the power play.
Yeah, that's one thing is they were hoping that he would help advance their power play, which definitely didn't happen.
Well, their whole power play looked like crap this year.
Pasternak for the past couple of years actually doesn't have a lot of power play points. Isn't that weird? Like for years, it's just so strange.
Yeah. So that was the mindset of the offseason. It wasn't to bring in players to get them to the playoffs. They thought they had a playoff team. It was the players that could extend their playoff run.
Do you feel the players that were already here agreed with the route that was taken? Did they also feel confident about it? Okay.
I do. And again, I don't think that anyone expected Charlie Coyle and Trent Frederick to not produce the way they did the past two seasons.
Or at least close to it, yeah.
Right.
Something.
You know,
and Trent Frederick, we were expecting a big step forward.
I was expecting Charlie Coyle to at least produce the way he did the past 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because that historic year, he played on that third line with Trent Frederick and Taylor Hall. Because, you know, Bergeron was still here, Krejci was still here. So, but then that second year, he was playing with Marchand, and they built phenomenal chemistry, and they played really well together. And Zacha obviously moved up and took that center role to play with Pasternak that second year, and he again produced really well. And all of a sudden, you saw Morgan Geekie come out of nowhere, right? Yeah. So you start this season. And Coyle's nowhere to be found. Frederick's nowhere to be found. Brazeau's nowhere to be found. Morgan Geekie started off so slow. Yep. And then you were like, and Pasta's not putting up Pasta numbers. You know what I mean? Like the team just couldn't find its rhythm.
Yeah. And then on top of that, the back end injuries, of course, but also Zadorov can't figure out whether to be on the wall or at center ice. You've got Lohrei struggling to do anything defensively. McAvoy, even before the injury, wasn't having a bang-up season.
Yeah, McAvoy was not having a McAvoy year.
Yeah, and maybe the most important one of all of these, outside of the goaltending, but Carlo
Yeah.
was having a very down year defensively, and when you want to talk about the glue guy on the back end,
Yeah.
I mean, that was Brandon Carlo.
Yeah.
There's just
He
everything went
didn't
wrong at the same time.
he started to find his rhythm more when they switched to having Chris Kelly coaching the PK instead of the power play. And Jay Leach took over doing the power play instead of the PK. That was when he started, and that was when you saw an uptake in the penalty kill as well. Was when they switched it. Now, notoriously through hockey, we all have this conversation, is that you want your best penalty killer as your power play coach because you can anticipate being a penalty killer where the puck's going to be. But in the same sense, Chris Kelly was one of the best PKers the Bruins had, you know what I mean? So he could be just a special teams coach. He doesn't need to do either or. But the fact that they split it and it wasn't working but I mean, in reality, you look at the players in their positions on the power play. I can't figure out why they weren't scoring.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
They had the right players in the right spots. The only thing I would have done differently, obviously, you lose Hampus as your number one quarterback. You know what I mean? You lose him as your number one quarterback. Charlie McAvoy, I love Charlie. He's not a good quarterback for the power play.
Yeah, no.
He's good as a secondary defenseman, but he's not good as the quarterback. And Lorai is a good quarterback, but he needs to control the puck better and make better decisions. But he is, because he has that offensive mind. Him and Hampus have those offensive minds that he could be a better quarterback. And I have no problems with him being QB2 if Hampus is healthy to start the season next year.
Yeah. You know, this is going to sound insane because I'm not a big Zadorov guy. I haven't been for years. And when that contract got signed, I was beside myself. But it's a guy that I actually, once Hampus and McAvoy went down, I'm like, I am shocked we have not seen him on the power play unit yet, on the top power play unit. That guy can pass the puck and he can skate really well. I know this is not his bread and butter, but it can't get worse.
No, and I think that you're right about that. But so I don't not like Zadorov. I think we didn't see Zadorov.
Oh, that's what I'm hoping. I'm hoping that, and I've watched him for years, though, so this is where I'm very kind of concrete in my opinion of the guy. But the last 6 weeks were so brilliant that I was like, okay, if this is what we're getting, awesome. Like, superb.
But not only that, but we missed playoff Zadorov. We didn't see playoff Zadorov. You know, and I talked to Mark Recchi right before the trade deadline. I had an exclusive with Mark Recchi and we talked about it. And I was like, listen, I'm like, Sweeney says it. People say it. You know, everyone says it. For the fans that don't understand it, or the hockey people that are newer to the sport, when you say a team is built for the playoffs, explain that like I'm a 5-year-old. I mean, I know what it means, but not everyone else knows what it means. Can you imagine facing him for 7 games?
Oh my gosh. It would just be the worst. It'd be like, I mean, you play the Panthers, you're like, oh my gosh, I got to watch out for Sam Bennett's cheap shots or Kachuk's squirreliness. Zadorov, there's nothing cheap about it. He's just a monster. You're just staring at the Frankenstein monster and going, I've got to face off with you every other shift for the next 2 weeks? Fuck that.
No, and not only that, but he's got that snarl that's going to protect those players, to make a Sam Bennett think twice, to make a Kachuk think twice. Maybe not the first time, but the second time.
I've always been very dubious on that, because some of these guys are so unhinged. Like Kostelic. Like, do you think there's a guy in the league, even Zadorov, that Kostelic would be like, I'm afraid of you, I'm gonna not, or like, I'm gonna hesitate here? I think Kostelic still hits them. It's still like, it deals with the repercussions. I think Bennett might be one of those guys. It's like, I do not care. Although that punch.
Oh, I 100% agree with you on that. But I think that if he has to drop the gloves with Zadorov more than once, that's when, it's not like Chuck dropping the gloves with Pasternak. You know what I mean? Like Zadorov doesn't care if you're Alexander Barkov, if you're Matthew Tkachuk, or if you're Sam Bennett. He's going to protect his team.
Honestly, him laying out Sam Bennett at the end of the season basically made everything about that contract feel way better in general. Let's talk about the trade deadline. You touched on it a little bit, but so let's talk about how that went. Now, obviously, the nerves, I think we've well versed on at this point. We talk about there's all these articles that come out about players, and you just don't know what's going to happen. You can't really be that confident that you're not getting moved, especially in a year like this, a year that some of these guys have not been through in a very long time. Right. The aftermath of it all. Coyle's gone. Carlo's gone. Right there, you're like two voices in the room. Brazeau, Frederic, those were more predictable. And then Marchand, your literal captain. I want to relate this to the Rantanen trade a little bit because we saw Colorado's personnel after that trade, the shock and awe of it all. And they went through the regular season, and there was just frequent talk, especially from McKinnon, about how it would be nice to have the guy, right? No offense to the new guys we have and blah, 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 blah. But it hurt. It really hurt. And even the exit interviews that they did, or not even exit interviews, the interviews directly after their Game 7 loss in round 1, you can hear the subtext from them of McKinnon mentioning they were missing their best forward or their best defenseman and maybe their best forward. We still couldn't beat them. Like you hear the subtext of like, we're missing more superstar talent that we had.
Right.
And so that team, I think it affected them. And I think it really affected them through the year. The Bruins come out of the trade deadline with 2 great wins, and then they lose a billion games straight.
Mm-hmm.
Was the direct response initially like, all right, get in gear, like let's really see what we can do, and then it just kind of fell apart? It just took a little bit of adversity for it to crumble because it was a fake wall anyway? Or was it we're totally lost and we somehow managed to scrape together a couple wins and then the real team showed up?
I think it was a combination of both. I think that they were like, crap, we just lost Marchand. We just lost our captain. We lost Coyle. And Marchand was hurt. Marchand wasn't even playing. Like, people forget Marchand wasn't even playing. So Marchand wasn't playing. Brazeau was the first to go.
Mm-hmm.
And then Freddie. And Freddie was hurt. Freddie wasn't playing. So it was really Coyle and Carlo were the 2 that were still playing that were really impacting the team.
Mm-hmm.
And Carlo especially, PK.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He's an elite penalty killer in the league, not just in the Eastern Conference. He is an elite penalty killer in the league. And they lost that. So I think that part of it was the new guys coming in were like, shit, we're playing for an original 16. We got to make sure that the fans know that, we're worth it, or,
we're sticking around. We're going to be. Yeah.
And I think that Swayman's like, all right, well, there's an overhaul, a team in front of me. I need to do something. You know what I mean? So I think that was part of it. And then I think we saw the team that was there all year long. The team that just didn't play 60 minutes. The team that just couldn't find their rhythm for a full 60 minutes. A team that couldn't find the fire. The team that we saw 2-3 years ago that even if they were down 2 goals, you're like, oh, they're going to come back. They're going to force overtime at least. They didn't have that this year at all. They had no... Like, if they were down 2 goals going in the third, you counted it as a loss. There was no, 100%. You're like, they're not coming back. And if they were
think we might have come back for that once all year. I think maybe once.
And if they were up by 2 goals going into the third, and there was a push, you're going, no. And as soon as the other team pulled their goaltender, you're like, oh, well, this game's over. You hadn't, like, I don't think anyone had faith in this team this year.
I'm not even sure. That leaked into the players as well at a certain point late in the season?
I mean, it kind of has to, you know? I don't think they would ever admit it, but you know, when you've been there, done that, when you continually can come back, you have that mojo. You have that, we're down 2 goals, we can come back. But when you're constantly coming from playing from behind, and you're not getting the 2 points, you're not forcing that overtime, it's got to seep into your head. It's got to be that mental block that says, oh, we're down, we're not going to come back. Because how many goals did they give up in the second and third periods?
Oh my gosh, a
You
billion.
know? So I
All of
think
them.
I think it does have to creep into their heads at some point, you know? And I think that as much as they say, we feel we have it in the room, like Swayman would say it after every single game. I have believability. I have faith. It's going to turn around. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. They weren't doing it.
Yeah.
They weren't doing it. So he may believe it and he may be saying it because he's, the more you say it, maybe you can, what's that word?
Placebo effect? I don't know. Like I know
Yeah,
what you're
you
getting
know
at.
what I mean? Like you say it enough, it happens. Maybe that's what
Manifest.
he's
You're
trying to do.
manifesting it. There it is.
Yes, manifest. Thank you. So, I mean, but it didn't happen.
Yeah. How
So,
we alluded to how great Zadorov was the last 6-8 weeks of the season on the ice.
mhm,
How incredible was this guy off the ice? Because from a fan perspective, it looked like he refused to take these losses as the norm. He was
mhm,
going to call out players, his own teammates. The comments
mhm,
about the net minding, everything goes in. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that I think Bostonians love. We
mhm.
sit there and go, yes, this is not acceptable. Was he like immediately the guy in the room?
I think he was a little bit quieter at first.
Okay.
I think that he was trying to feel his way. He definitely was vocal if he was asked a question at the
Mhm.
beginning. You know what I mean? Like he didn't shy away from any questions. But as the season went along, he definitely became more of a I'm not even going to wait for you to ask. I'm going to tell you my opinion.
Mhm.
What I absolutely loved about Zadorov was his breakup day interview.
Yeah.
I'm in a scrum and I was standing in front of him, and it was funny because the cameraman for Nesson was standing next to me. And the joke is that the cameras always try and get in front. I'm like, listen, I'm vertically challenged. The camera's above my head, especially with a guy like Zadorov, who I have to look up to, right? So I'm standing there with Zadorov, and I think it was Joe Haggerty asked him how he felt about his season or something. And he goes, "We're gonna make the playoffs.
Right.
Like, why you ask me about my personal, like my personal season?" Like, he literally didn't care about his own season. He cared about the fact that the Bruins did not accomplish the goal.
Yeah. That's a
You
very
know,
Hags question too.
and he literally was like, and when someone said with a season like this, and I love this about him as well. With a season like this, how do you get free agents to want to come here? Well, why wouldn't you want to come here? It's an
Mhm.
original six, you know what I mean? Like it was just the way he said it and the way he carried himself. And it's funny because there are some people that are like, "Oh, I don't like him." In the reporters. I don't like him.
Oh.
I don't like
Oh.
his attitude. And I'm like, "Oh, I love him because
Yeah.
he's such a good interview."
Yeah.
Um, but like I would joke around about the fact that except for a few interviews, Charlie McAvoy is one of the worst interviews.
Really?
Yeah, he's so monotone and
Mm.
but like you could tell he started to grow more in his role again. Like Pasternak definitely put this team on his back in the locker room and on the ice.
Yeah, where did that come from? The in the locker room stuff, as soon as Marchand was out, it was all of a sudden. I mean, again, I'm not in the locker room, but the media bites, the sound bites, everything like that. I'm sitting there going, what, Pasta just decided to firmly plant his feet and put everyone on his back?
So listen to Pasternak's interviews. It's always team, 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 right? He's
Yeah.
got a lot of that team mentality. It's not an I thing, it's a team thing. And when someone asked him after Marchand left, when Marchand was traded, they asked him about the C, and he's like, "I'm not talking about that." And so during breakup day, it was asked again, and he is like, we're a group of leaders. And he didn't say he didn't want to not wear the C, but I wouldn't be surprised if you saw 3 A's next year to start the season.
I'm hoping for it, actually. I don't think it's time for another captain yet.
I would be fine if it was Pastrnak. I really would. I would be.
Really?
I don't want it to be McAvoy, but I think that Pastrnak.
The more people I talk to closer to the team, they make it seem like McAvoy doesn't want it either. Exactly. Like the A is one thing, but the C is not.
But you know what? I don't think. So the Bruins, obviously, if you go back the history of captains, how many are defensemen? How many of them are forwards?
I actually couldn't tell you.
I mean, well, you got to look at some of the longest tenured captains. Ray Bourque, Zdeno Chara. You know what I mean? Like you look at that. Like Bergeron was only captain for 2 years,
right?
3 years,
and he's a defensive specialist anyway. So it's
right. So it's always, I mean Terry O'Reilly, but he was a forward. But I mean, you look at the captaincy. I mean, Ray Bourque was captain for what, 18 years? Was pretty close to it.
Wow.
16, 17 years, something like that. Then it was like Joe Thornton, but another one that was traded during his captaincy, which, although for very different reasons. And Michael Connell should have been shot at that point. I still joke that I wish that because Joe won the scoring, he brought the trophy. I wish he brought the trophy and put it on Mike's desk and said, "Thank you."
He's the only player to win the Hart while also being traded midseason.
I think so.
That's it. Yeah. Good for him.
But I just, the maturity that we saw in Pastrnak throughout the course, not even after Marchand was traded, when Hampus Lindholm went down, Pastrnak became a little bit more vocal. And then after McAvoy got injured and Brad Marchand was injured, and it was just Pasta. And then Marchand gets traded, and it's still just Pasta. It just, the way he carried himself, the way he put the team on his shoulders, on and off the ice, the maturity that we saw in him, the way he lifted up the younger players that came in, the way he interacted with the media, the way he interacted on the ice with the opposing teams, just everything about Pastrnak, I'm like, he's my captain.
So next year, say he is captain or it's just 3 A's. Who are your people for that? So Pasta's one of them.
McAvoy.
McAvoy is. Okay.
And then for me, if Hampus is ready, it's Hampus.
It's Hampus. So Zadorov would need to do more to get there. In my book, Zadorov needs a good playing season to like.
Yes. If he plays the whole season the way he played the last 6 weeks, then he could earn a letter. But the way they kind of all look at it too, it doesn't matter who's wearing a letter. Like, and that was one of the things that Pastrnak said too. Doesn't matter. And Marchand used to say it. It doesn't matter if you're here 1 day, 1 year, 3 years, because a lot of the players like Zadorov, even Elias Lindholm, they may be new to Boston, but they have the veteran experience in the NHL. I mean, you look at it this way. If it weren't for Bergeron and Marchand, Nick Foligno could have been captain of the Bruins.
I mean, it's not something I can argue with, but dang.
But if you think about it, if you seriously think about it, if it weren't for Bergeron and Marchand after Chara left, Nick Foligno being a former captain for how many years in Columbus, being in Boston, and he immediately became a leader in the locker room, regardless of not wearing a letter, because that first year that he was there, it was Bergeron, Marchand, and Krejci, right? So regardless of him not wearing a letter, he was still a leader in that locker room.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right? So it doesn't, and that's how the Bruins have always been built. That they respect the players that have been around the league, that have the experience, that have the veteran leadership, and they embrace it.
Mm-hmm.
They embrace it. So I think that they were kind of missing those voices the last couple of years.
Yeah, I think I would probably agree with that.
I mean, you had Marchand, who pretty much learned everything from Krejci and Bergeron and Chara.
Mm-hmm.
Pasternak, who learned from them, and McAvoy, who learned from them. But they're not as long. I mean, it feels like they've been there forever, but they weren't really in leadership roles.
Yeah, no.
You know what I mean? Like, Pasternak was not a leader when Krejci and Bergeron were there.
I never would have imagined Pasternak being a leader at any point anyway. It just didn't
No,
make sense to me.
no one expected that. You expected Coyle to step up. You know what I mean? But then or Brandon Carlo. You know what I mean? Like, you look at the players that have been there, but they were all like, how Pasternak transformed over this past year is just amazing.
Yeah, it's nice to see as well. Like, there's still, the team can respond to a season like this, and it can infect and it can become the norm. And instead, what I'm taking out of it is multiple players standing on their feet and going, "This is not the norm. This is not acceptable." And Pasternak has to change the way he approaches his day-to-day life to be more vocal, to be that leader, and that's not easy to do. To just like, hey, this matters. I have to take on this responsibility, even when no one's telling me I have to. But like, this is important, and it's what will hopefully prevent a backward slide into a very, very long rebuild.
And another thing that they all, Pasternak, McAvoy, Lindholm, Hampus and Elias, and Zadorov, what they were all saying was, we're going to be meeting throughout the summer to discuss how we want to move forward. They have a leadership group of players, regardless of who's wearing the A, who's wearing the C, whoever's wearing a letter. They know those are the veteran leaders that they're going to lean on to move forward and continue to build the Bruins culture. Is it going to be the exact culture that they had when Bergeron was here? No, because they're not the same players, and the league's not the same.
Yes,
It's
that's
not,
a huge part of this. Yeah,
that's a huge part of it. And as more players come in, it's all, I mean, and the other thing that Zadorov said, it's all about the B that you wear on your chest. You know what I mean? So the Bruins culture obviously changed from the minute Zdeno Chara laced up his skates wearing the spoked B, and he implemented this new culture. And it got back to where it should have been. You know what I mean? That they lost after they lost Ray Bourque and, several other players. And so now going forward, it's still going to be the same culture, but it's going to be different because it's not the same voices.
Yeah, I really agree with that. And actually, this is another decent segue into, let's chat a little bit. We're going to do some season grades for the front office, but the first guy I actually want to list here is the good soldier himself, Sacco.
Okay.
What a year! What an unfortunate task to be tasked with. What an unfair situation. I don't think there's anyone out there. The criticisms are plentiful. I understand that, but through the year, and we'll end it with the grade, but he's a guy I want to ask about. How was he handling this? Obviously, the losses are racking up. The idea that he's the guy to lead the team gets more and more distant. He's part of the coaching search, but I'm not sure if everyone really buys that to a full degree. How has he handled this process, especially towards the end of the season? This is sensitive. I know that you can't just rip off with this.
Yeah. So, I mean, with what the team was doing, he could have been Mike Sullivan. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And the
You
team
mean
would
like as
still,
far as effective? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, he could have been John Cooper and the team still wasn't going to perform. So he did the best he could. I mean, he didn't shuffle the lines a lot. Um, he did make some changes and some of them worked, obviously, moving Lindholm up towards the end of the year. Um, you saw Lysell get more time on the power play towards the end of the year. So he was rewarding the players.
Mm-hmm.
I think maybe his, I don't know if he made the decision, if goalie Bob made the decision, if Neely made the decision, but hindsight, it would have been nice to see Korpisalo a little bit more. Maybe things could have been a little bit different. Maybe they were fighting longer for that playoff spot. You don't know. But that was the difference between him and Monty. Whenever he was asked about goaltending, it was I didn't pull because of this or I didn't do this. And Monty would be like, well, I refer to goalie Bob. Every decision about the goalies, Monty didn't say he made the decision. He always said that it was whatever goalie Bob wanted. But Sacco was there were times where Swayman was keeping them in games and the defense let him down in front of him. There were times where he's like, Swayman wants that one back. So he wasn't sugarcoating things. And that's something that where I give him high grades for. He didn't sugarcoat and say, this, that. He didn't fall on the sword and say it was all my fault, or he would say, well, we played this stretch, but then they'd start to push back and we just didn't have it. You know what I mean? So he was very honest in his press conferences. So I got to give him credit for that. Do I want to see him return as coach? As just me, Gayle Troiani, not who I work for.
Not Nesson, not any of that.
Yeah. No, I don't want to see him return. I would love to see him return as the associate coach. Mm-hmm. I just don't think he's ready to lead this team in transition.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great way to put that too. Because if I were to give him, if C is like you've met expectations, that's it. The C grade is, I would argue that he deserves nothing lower than a C.
Right.
You were given an impossible task.
Right.
And you did what you could with it. Now, there were certainly moments where I was like, I don't know why he doesn't. I mean, why don't NHL coaches use their timeout once in a damn while when the rails are coming off of it? I would almost wish they gave them like 2 timeouts in the game. That way they could utilize that a little. But there were moments where I was like, I don't know why he's not changing. Is he frozen by like this idea that if I make too many changes and it doesn't work, are they going to view that as a bad idea for my candidacy for the permanent job? But I would give him a C because I don't think he really went above expectations for me, but he simply was given an impossible task and soldiered his way through it.
Right. Well, not only that, but, was he thinking in his head, well, that was one thing that everyone hated about Montgomery was that it was a lineup salad. Like he constantly changed his lines. So was he overcompensating for that, and not making adjustments?
Good point.
The other question is, when you're down 5-2, why are you not pulling your goaltender and trying to give your team the lift that way? You know what I mean? Why are you not calling a time, like you said, not calling a timeout to try and regroup? And then maybe, there were times where it's like Swayman has to be benched at the end of this period, and Swayman comes back out. Like, why is he back out there?
Yeah.
So those are the questions that I have, and was it him that was making those decisions? Was he playing it safe? Kind of like what you said, so was he overcompensating? Like, I don't know. So I agree with that. I would agree with the C. And I'm not, and like I said, it depends on, like, I don't want Joel Quenneville, but I don't want him to coach I don't want him to coach anywhere in the league. I was kind of joking around saying, are they going to look at Stephen Ott? But I was kind of joking about that. But, Sweeney did make the comment that some of the candidates that they were looking at were still in the playoffs. Well, Stephen Ott is an associate coach in St. Louis. Okay.
What a funny little swap that would be.
Right. Are they looking at Mark Savard?
I would love that for a special teams boost.
But but I'm looking at Mark Savard and I'm going, okay, so Mark Savard, maybe he brings in Mark Recchi. And then you got Savard, Recchi, Jay Leach, and Chris Kelly. That's not a bad coaching staff.
It's not. It's also not exactly letting go of the past, is it?
No, but you think that's the last team that won.
Yeah, good point.
So I don't know who they're looking at who's still in the playoffs. Like I was looking at all the teams and I'm like, who? And I kind of threw it out there with Stephen Ott. Not that I want Stephen Ott to be the head coach, but Stephen Ott may be the voice that they need instead of a Peter Laviolette. Like let's not recycle the same head coaches.
We don't need to see Tortorella again. Like we don't.
Right.
Torts is done. It's fine.
Well, and Torts doesn't want to be on a team that's going through a retool or a rebuild. He wants a contender. Yeah. That's why he left Philadelphia. He's like, I'm done. You know what I mean? And it's just I had my reservations about Sullivan. I love Mike Sullivan. I was pissed when they fired Mike Sullivan and hired Dave Lewis. You know what I mean? Coming out of that lockout. But I still had my reservations about him with Charlie McAvoy on this team. I understand that it's professional hockey and they need to separate it, but it's still that weird gray area. Sure. It's not college. It's, you see, like, not to talk about the NBA, but LeBron James basically bullied the Lakers into drafting his son. And what did it do? You know what I mean? It did nothing.
A bunch of criticism is what it did.
Right. So you have those things.
I don't know. On the Short Shift podcast, said the same thing. He was very concerned about like the father-son aspect there, or not stepfather, but the father-in-law.
Yeah.
I lean away from it. I kind of sit there and go, you know what? I'm not a huge Sullivan guy. I mean, I obviously have a great respect for what he's done, but as far as if Sweeney was really going to push for, like, I want a guy who has NHL tenure under their belt, like Sullivan's the best option in my mind.
Oh, yeah.
Those candidates.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think I'd be overly concerned with the McAvoy stuff just because the professionalism that Sullivan seems to carry himself with. I'd kind of be like, you know what? I bet he could look at his son-in-law and tell him that he's fucking up. I think he could.
Right.
I think
and a lot of people say they did it for Four Nations, and I'm like, but again, that was a tournament. That wasn't
couple of weeks.
That's not 82 games. That was 5 games. You know what I mean? So, yeah. And then, but then you have to wonder too: would he overcompensate? And, you know what I mean? To say that there's no nepotism, you know what I mean? Would he overcompensate? So
too harsh. You don't get any power play time. You're right. Yeah. That'd be an interesting one. I mean, obviously not going to happen now with him going to the Rangers, but I don't know. I honestly don't know what you can or cannot say, giving the grades to Sweeney, Neely, and Jacobs. Jacobs, I like to default to an F just for funsies. But really what we're talking about is Sweeney and Neely.
Okay.
And personally, I think Sweeney has 2 different grades if we're going to talk about the offseason, like the prior offseason, because personally, it's a full flat-out F in my book. I think it was a really bad offseason unless Zadorov and Elias can continue their play from the last 6 weeks or so. But I'm not nice enough to give an incomplete for that reason. But I think it was a really bad offseason, and this season started with a lot of issues. The trade deadline, I loved. I adored the trade deadline. I mean, you had to take a stance. You couldn't be a fence sitter. Didn't sit. The most gut-wrenching, awful trade deadline from a fan perspective, but an effective one.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit different. I'll give him a C- for the off season.
Okay.
And the reason why I give him a C- for the off season is because I think so. I don't hate Elias Lindholm.
That's good.
I don't hate him. I was more. I don't hate him. I don't think I think people are expecting to see Elias Lindholm that played with Gaudreau or Elias Lindholm that played with Kachuk.
Yeah.
And we may see that next year with Pasternak when he's fully healthy.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be very nice. But I think dollar amount aside, and I think that's the problem that people get held up on, is the dollar amount. It's not that they came here, it's the dollar amount that Sweeney paid them. You know what I mean? And I think, again, that he wasn't brought in to be this offensive, player. They brought him in for him to be that 200-foot player that they were lacking when they lost Bergeron, and to be a player that when they get into the playoffs, to take those all important face-offs.
Yes,
And to be
he
the
had another amazing face-off year, 57%.
right.
Yeah, I think it was.
So I think you got to look at that. And literally, he ended up with more points this year than he did last year.
Which is so scary.
Right? So for as bad as he played at the beginning of the season, his point production was up. So yeah. I don't hate that signing. Okay. I was not a fan of the Mac Jones. I'm like, whatever. My biggest issue that Sweeney had this offseason was he did not replace Jake DeBrusk.
Yes. So with you on that.
And I'm not a big Jake DeBrusk fan.
I am.
I'm not. I was very vocal about that. I think for what he was asking, he was too inconsistent.
Sure.
So I was happy with the Bruins not overpaying him. That was my thing. But they didn't replace him. That was my problem. And again, he was expecting Coyle and Frederick and this one and that one to step up to step up internally. But they needed that secondary scoring and they never found it. So that was my biggest thing in the offseason, was that they did not replace Jake DeBrusk. So that's why I give him a C-. If they had replaced Jake DeBrusk, he may have gotten a B. You know what I mean? But C-, borderline D, because they just didn't replace that secondary scoring.
Yeah, and that did end up being a grave miscalculation too.
Right, but trade deadline, 100% A+.
Yeah,
100% A+.
Yeah. Even with the Marchand trade, because now it does seem more and more that we were doing Marchand a favor. But Marchand chose his spot, and they said, hey, he's hurt, and also we know that he's trying to come here. We're not going to give you anything of that much value. All right. Conditional first. Let's do it.
Right.
I'm okay with them doing him a favor, honestly.
So am I. He deserves it.
Yeah.
He wasn't a bad teammate. Nope. He wasn't bad-mouthing, you know what I mean? He gave his... There were times where you looked at him and you're like, he has no business being on the ice. But he fought and he clawed and he, him coming back as early as he did from his double hip surgery, all that stuff, you just it's like, what was the training staff doing? Marchand is a true Bruin and he deserved to get that opportunity, just like Ray Bourque did.
Yes. And at the end of the day, I'm a big defender, or maybe not defender is the word here, but I get frustrated when the GM isn't running the team. I get frustrated when there's conversation, or Monty, when he talked about I didn't have to do much. Bergeron was a vocal guy in the room. I still want you to coach. I still want you to be in charge. And if Sweeney talks about various reasons why he didn't do certain things because the player wanted this or the player wanted, when people were talking about how if Marchand wants $7 million a year for the next 3 years, you just got to give it to him. Nope, I want my GM to make a decision on that. And I'm not giving him
$7 million.
Right. I'm not doing it. And to at least have the respect when we get to the trade deadline and he goes, okay, we can't find common ground. Mm-hmm. I'd like to go here. Give me a shot at a cup.
Right.
And for them to go, yes. That's the kind of mutual respect there where you just go, awesome. And I think Sweeney also got to sit there and go, hey, I got a ton for Coyle. I got a nice little deal for Brazeau. I got a really good deal or
for
a
Carlo.
decent deal for Carlo. Frederick. I'm pretty happy with the assets coming back. We're just going to do right by you.
Right. My thing too, that one thing that I love about Sweeney, and I'm not a Sweeney hater. I know there's people that absolutely
There's
hate
plenty of
Sweeney.
them for sure.
I don't hate Sweeney, and I wouldn't want any other GM leading this retool right now.
Any other GM?
I
Like,
wouldn't.
he's your number one guy.
For
Wow. All
this
right. Cool.
retool. Now, if he doesn't fix this retool, that could change my opinion. But right
Retool
now,
versus rebuild. I gotcha.
going
Yeah.
into this retool, I want him doing this retool. I've seen what he can do. I have faith in him. Okay. And I know a lot of people like, well, he did this, he did that. Well, he was up against the cap. But anyways,
Every GM has some stuff you can point to that, like,
what I love about Sweeney is he will never throw a player under the bus about their contract. He will never talk about negotiations. He will never talk about, he'll say, we didn't meet term. We didn't meet this. But he will never throw a player under the bus.
Right.
It wasn't him that said, I have 64 millions why I'd be playing right now. That was Neely that said that, not Sweeney, when he was talking about Swayman. Sweeney did not throw Brad Marchand under the bus. What he said about Brad Marchand was, Brad thought his value was here. We couldn't come to common ground. I will never disparage a player from finding that value.
Yeah.
I have so much respect for him because, yes, he's looking out for the Bruins, but he's also looking out for the players that have shown their loyalty to the Bruins through their tenure. And it doesn't matter if it was Tyler Bertuzzi, Dmitry Orlov. It didn't matter if it's Brad Marchand, Zdeno Chara. It doesn't matter. He will never throw a player under the bus the way some other GMs do.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really
I
do.
have the utmost respect for it because you know what? Because you're not doing the players any favors if they do, like, a lot of people soured on Jeremy Swayman when Cam Neely made that comment about the 64 million because they're like, oh, he's selfish. You know what I mean? But a lot of that fell on his agent. A lot of that didn't fall on Swayman.
Who said it was a lie, by the way.
Right. Right. But I don't trust him because he's also William Nylander's agent who didn't
Lewis
bring all the.
Gross has a history.
Yes, he has a history. And he has a history with talented players.
Yeah.
William Nylander, Johnny Gaudreau. You know, it's not like they're schlubs. They're players
elite NHL
right.
players.
So the fact that Sweeney held everything close to the chest, close to the vest, and didn't divulge details. Even with Monty, he's just like, it takes two sides and we couldn't, you know what I mean? He never divulged why Bruce Cassidy is no longer the coach.
So remind me, actually, sorry to interrupt, but which one made the comment about Monty's team not being ready to start the year? Was that Neely or was that Sweeney?
No, that was Sweeney.
See, that's why I thought those comments were they just felt weird. Just like, what? That is the closest you've ever come to just being like, screw this guy.
Right. But I think that was him saying that when they're doing, because he was talking about the coach and he was talking about the coaching search. And he was basically saying, we need a coach that's going to come in and get this team ready. We just weren't ready coming out of training camp. And I don't think that 100% was on Montgomery. I think he was talking about it the whole picture. It just so happened that, you know what I mean? Like, because that was the truth. That was the truth. They were not ready coming out of training camp. And part of it had to do with Swayman not being there for training camp. Part of it had to do with the fact that Lindholm was injured. You know, like you said, Marchand's coming off surgeries and Pasternak wasn't 100%. You know what I mean? And so for him to say we weren't ready and this is what we're looking for in our next coach to make sure we are ready, I don't think that was really throwing Montgomery under the bus, but it was just kind of, this is what we're looking for. We need a coach that's going to be, because you look at the history of the coaches, Montgomery was nothing like Claude Julien or Bruce Cassidy.
Oh, no. Yeah, not at all.
Right.
Very, very creative style, very quick speed kind of. Defense was part of it, but I think Monty really benefited early on as the defensive structure was already there. And he's like, how can I just tweak this to be more open?
And his system obviously worked if you have the right players.
Which goes back to Sweetie's offseason of it just might. I think a big part of that firing comes down to people want to blame one side or the other. I think you can look at both sides and go like, you didn't build the right team for this coach, and this coach had something else going on, and not one that I'm willing to like speculate on at this point.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Last guy, obviously, Neely. It's weird to actually talk about what involvement he has. How do you grade him? Things of that nature. But I felt like he stirred the pot a lot this year. I feel like a lot of headlines came from comments that he made. I don't think this was a banger year for Neely. I really don't.
I think Neely was more available this year as well. And I think because he has been around, he's the one that makes the decision whether Sweeney stays or goes. I think that he sometimes has a little bit more say in what Sweeney does too. Like Sweeney he couldn't just fire Montgomery. He had to get permission.
Right.
You know what I mean? I think that
not every team works that way.
Not every team works that way. And I think Neely is a lot more involved in the draft, the signings, the trades. I think that the president is a lot more involved in Boston, which is why in a lot of other places, the president and the GM is the same person.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like Kyle Dubas is the president of hockey operations and the GM in Pittsburgh. You know what I mean? He doesn't have to fight anyone. He makes the decisions.
Yeah, he can have fun over there. That's a situation and a half.
Yeah. But they also have the most draft capital.
Do they actually?
They have 11 picks. They have 11 picks in this draft.
Holy, good for them, I guess. Wrong draft to have 11 picks in, but still, like that's not bad.
But that's also trade bait. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
for a team that may not need as much right now in their prospect pool, but needs to shed some cap. You know what I mean? So that could work in his favor.
Yeah, we'll see what happens out there.
Yeah.
But Neely, I think I honestly I don't know if you can give grades on this stuff, but I'm gonna give Neely probably D range on how I feel like this season was handled. There's just not a lot of moments I can point to. I really didn't like the way he made comments about the ongoing Swayman situation early on.
See, I actually liked it.
You liked it. You liked him calling out the contract.
I liked him calling it out because it moved the needle. And I think the deal got done quicker because he made the comment. I think if he had kept his mouth shut the way Sweeney was and Montgomery was and Charlie Jacobs was, I don't think the deal got done as quickly as it did. You know what I mean?
Really? Yeah.
Like, you got to think about it, how long it took Nylander to get signed.
That was December, right? I think it was deep into the season.
Right. It was right before the deadline of him being able to play. He was basically like, get my deal done. I want to play. He didn't want to forfeit the season. So by Neely calling it out the way he did, it forced it out there. Now, whether it was 8 million or 7 million and Sweeney, Neely threw out 64 and it was 56 or whatever it was, I don't care. He put it out there. It forced the deal to get done.
That's true. I know there's a lot of speculation too about whether or not Swayman even knew what the number was. Because
I don't trust his agent at all. I don't trust his agent.
Because the same speculation for Nylander. Like Nylander didn't actually know how much he was.
No, Nylander was vocal about that he did not know. Yeah,
that's crazy to me.
Yeah, the fact that but it blows my mind that these players know that he has this track record and they still sign with him.
Yeah, because he does get them a ton of money.
He does, but still, Yeah.
Money talks.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, it's hard to give Neely a grade because I don't really know how involved he is, but I give him props for the comment about Swayman.
Mhm.
I'm not really giving him props for the comment of the prospects outplaying their mistakes.
Mhm.
I can kind of understand where he's coming from. I think he was a little defensive about the draft. So, at the press conference, uh,
Yeah.
when Kevin Paul DuPont was asking that question. So it's kind of hard to give him a grade. But I mean, I give him a lower grade than Sweeney just because like he's got to almost step away and let Sweeney do his job.
Yeah. I so wish that Kevin Paul DuPont had a more of the research done when asking that question about drafting, because their response was a very predictable one, which is like, what are you referring to? And when
Right.
KPD couldn't come back with anything, I was like, ah, man, like this was a really,
Right.
this is what the
Because
fans want.
because then he automatically went to the 2015 that Sweeney gets
Yeah.
right over the coals for, and that was the
10
only
years
draft
ago.
that they talked about. Yeah.
I'm so sick
Yeah.
of that draft. No one remembers any of the nuance about it and all that
Oh,
stuff. But it was
yeah.
a bad draft. Like I'll give that to you all day, but
Yeah.
I don't know. Well, Gayle, thank you so much for taking the time. I took way more of your time than I told you I was. So thank you for chatting with me. Could
It
you
was a lot of
please?
fun.
Yeah, I had a blast. Could you plug your stuff real quick for us?
Sure. So my Twitter is on the screen. It's at Gayle Troiani _ Gayle _ Troiani. You can find my writings on Nesson.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm on all of them. So yeah, hit me. And I say this everywhere. I'm always up for a healthy debate. I just don't deal with trolls.
Yeah, there's a
But
lot of
I will
trolls out
debate
there.
because not everyone's going to agree on everything. So I will gladly have healthy debates as long as you're not just being a troll and, just a hater.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of haters out there too, but
Yeah.
Gayle, you do fantastic work. I really appreciate
Thanks.
your updates through the year, obviously, and your presence in the room. I was really glad to finally get to pick your brain a little bit about the season because this one was an interesting one for sure. But thank you so
Yeah.
much for joining.
Thank you, Ian.
And of course, thank you to everyone who has watched and listened to this episode. I hope that you got a couple of nuggets of interesting information. I certainly did. I really enjoyed that. That was a lot of fun. I'd love to do more of that. Get closer to a few people who are involved with the team, so I could have a better insight of the things that I'm talking about. Thank you again to Gayle. Taking the time out of her day. I stole her away from her family for a couple hours there, so really appreciate her coming on. Her insight to everything. I really respect everything those reporters do. So, yeah, that's pretty much it. And finally, I get to say this. I haven't been able to say this in a while. Go Bees. Go Bees! And of course, here at the end of the video, I love to give some shout outs to the fantastic high quality inspectors who help support the channel and keep this running. I super appreciate every single one of you, from the role player tier, the top line tier, and of course the all-star tier. We are going to do our shout outs for this top line tier. Thank you so much to Sean Kreider, Michael Kammerer, Chris and Erica, Kevin Timperley, Quackin' Platypus, JM, Smoke Channels, Shaggy, Adam Ella, Albert Waldron, Negev79, Lola Cattingsworth, EKM Productions, Moonlighter TV, Big Bad Bruin, The Bugman, Jeff with a G, Tommy Braga, Roland22, GD Viperworks, Len Kreutz, Brock Nope, Han Slobo, Coach D, The Atomic Lizard, Bradley Johnson, Brett Arney, Pincent, and Nick Zatrullo. Thank you so much, each and every one of you. Your top line material. But now we got to move on to our all-star tier members, the absolute legends. We have Jacob Pratt, Jake Brower, Dampen, JG's 12, Mark S., Ann Hustis, Tim R., Lorenzo Wood, Penny Pasta, Levi Catalani, Boston Stringler, Bagel, Nightmare Eco, John Kirk, Joel, Stealthy Potato, Heil E. Coyote, Darren Woodbury, Abraxion, Wolf Warrior, Vinny, Adrian Winter, Tukton D. Tashi, Bruins Smash, D.A. Kingery, The Only Newts, A Tasty Snack, Dutes42, and Jeremy. Thank you all for all of the support and love that you are all giving. I appreciate each and every one of you. And as always, go Bees!